What's up, guys? This is Xander Bennett, and today we are continuing our top 10 series to be talking about the top 10 fire-type Pokemon throughout all of history. We worked together on this and have curated this top 10 list to be what we think is as accurate as can be. The only rules that we have is that we are not repeating Pokemon on the top 10 list, just to try to keep it diverse. But fire has been around for such a long time that there are a lot of different Pokemon that are on this list, so we didn't have to worry about that as much. But if you're feeling antsy, go ahead and put in the comment section what you think the top 10 is going to be, and then let us know if you were right after you watch the video. Before we get started with the top 10 list, we have two different honorable mentions that we are going to talk about. Starting off the list is Flareon from Plasma Freeze, this being our first honorable mention. It is a 100 HP Stage 1 Pokemon that's a Team Plasma Pokemon that part didn't really have that much of an impact on the card's playability. But the main thing that did is for a double colorless, this Pokemon had the attack called Vengeance. It did 20 plus 10 for each Pokemon in your discard pile. If you've been playing more as of late, you might also recognize this as Be Revenge off of Vespiquen, but this was the first card that had the attack of this style. As soon as this card came out, it received a top 16 at Worlds in the hands of Dylan Bryan. He played a crazy rogue deck featuring this, Leafeon from Plasma Freeze, Landorus, Terrakion, and it was this really meta, try to anti-meta deck. It played Drifblim to get rid of special energy, or to do damage based off the number of special energies your opponent has in their discard pile, and was just this crazy wild rogue deck. From there, though, the deck got some legs to stand on. Whenever Slurpuff from Phantom Forces came out, it became a standard deck that used Slurpuff to just draw through your deck as fast as possible, with Battle Compressor also coming out in Phantom Forces to really amplify this deck's power. Once Primal Clash came out, Orion Craig won a regional with Flareon with Archie's Empoleon to use Empoleon to discard cards in the expanded format and then just draw two cards. So the deck got strength there. Then whenever Vespiquen came out from Ancient Origins that has the same attack as this card, those cards partnered together very well in the standard and expanded formats, making multiple top 8s at different expanded regionals. And then after this, the Vespiquen deck, inspired from the Flareon deck, would continue to have success in the form of Vespiquen Zoroark, the Breakpoint one, not the Zoroark GX. And Vespiquen Vileplume was a deck that Vespiquen was able to play kind of in the same style as this. So Flareon being a super strong non-GX attacker, and a really just generally cool deck overall, having made it through many different iterations of different standard formats because of the power of getting cards like Unknown from Ancient Origins into your discard pile, just getting a free draw to your next card. You had Parallel City in different formats to discard some of your own bench Pokemon. There was Battle Compressor, as mentioned, to thin out that way. The deck played Lysander's Trump card in different formats, which is hilarious, because why would you play Trump card in the deck that wants stuff in its discard pile? Just being able to dig through your deck so fast with Acrobikes and Battle Compressors and Slurpuff means that you could just go through it over and over again. So Flareon definitely came out as a very strong card and continued until it rotated. Our second honorable mention that we are going to talk about is Ho-Oh GX from the Burning Shadows set. This is a recent addition to the game, just left standard. Ho-Oh GX was a 190 HP basic fire Pokemon, which from the start was a huge amount of HP for a GX to have. Whenever 190 basic HP GXs came out, it was just crazy. It had two great attacks and a very suboptimal GX attack. But the first attack for fire double colorless does 50 to one of your opponent's Pokemon, not applying weakness and resistance to bench. For 3 fire and a colorless, it had Phoenix Burn for 180 damage, and this Pokemon could not use Phoenix Burn during your next turn. This was the attack that you really cared about, just being able to use this attack over and over again to take huge knockouts. And then the GX attack, as I mentioned, not super great. For fire double colorless, you could put 3 of any combination of fire GX or fire EXs from your discard pile onto your bench. So what was neat about that was that you could get stage 2s, but the catch is that there was just nothing great that you wanted to get back with this. This card we are talking about because it came out with powerful cards like Kiawe and Turtonator GX. Kiawe was a supporter that says you may search your deck for 4 fires and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then your turn ends. So what was great about that was that with Tapu Lele in the format, you could just play Lele, get your Kiawe, and power this thing up on turn 1. So if you went first on your second turn of the game, you'd be doing 180 damage minimum. Choice Band 210, be taking super easy knockouts in this format. Turtonator, as mentioned, also has a GX attack, Nitro Tank, which allows you to attach 5 fire energy from your discard pile to your Pokemon in play in any way that you like. So not only could you attack with Turtonator in certain matchups you wanted to discard the energy like Gardevoir or use Shell Trap as a wall, being able to, in the middle of the game, use Nitro Tank to power up Ho-Ohs as fast as possible really allowed this deck to continue having the steam that it needed to move forward. Cards like Max Elixir helped power up Ho-Oh, and outside of the Ho-Oh Kiawe decks, there was also the Ho-Oh Salazzle deck that saw random success at different events throughout the season. Ho-Oh's biggest finish would most likely be a 7th place finish at the Internationals in Sydney by Corey Godfrey, but outside of that, the deck did not have any major performances, which is why it is down here on the honorable mentions. But it would be hard to mention this list without talking about the scared factor that Ho-Oh GX brought to Standard, that your deck could just be taking 210 damage on turn 2. Starting off our top 10, coming in 10th place is Pyroar, that had the ability Intimidating Mane that said that you prevented all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks of your opponent's basic Pokemon. So this did not prevent status conditions, but it prevented all damage from basic Pokemon, which in a format of such big basics was a huge deal. And then the attack, which is not that interesting, but paired with the ability was great. For a fire and double colorless, you did 60, and then you may discard a fire energy attached to this Pokemon to do 30 more damage. So we are mainly here just for the ability of this card. This card came out and was terrifying for a lot of decks. People weren't sure if the damage cap was going to be high enough to make it successful, but the deck started off its lifetime with a 2nd place finish at Nationals 2014 in the hands of Michael Pramawat. The deck played multiple copies of Blacksmith to be able to power this Pokemon up as fast as possible, on top of 4 copies of double colorless energy, so you were ready to attack on turn 2. The deck also played Bicycle and Roller Skates, which, from the look of it, are not that impressive cards, but they really just wanted to get Pyroars out as fast as possible and continue just attacking with these Pokemon that could not be damaged by your opponent's stuff. Pyroar didn't have a crazy amount of finishes outside of that, but just the diversity that it brought to Standard for people really to have to consider their deck and how they're going into Pyroar was definitely something that puts Pyroar here at this lower spot on this list. The history for 2014 is also not as recorded super well, so there might be more tournament stuff that I have not found, and that's totally fine. The deck did get second to Brandon Salazar playing Landorus, Mewtwo, Raichu, Garbodor, just a handful of different stuff that deck was playing. Having the Raichu to attack through the Pyroars and the Garbodors to turn off Pyroar allowed for that deck to beat this deck out. But Pyroar coming in at number 10 on the list. Coming in at number 9 on this list is Ho-Oh EX. Notably, there were 2 Ho-Oh EXs printed. We're talking about the Ho-Oh EX from Dragons Exalted. Ho-Oh EX was a 160 HP basic Fire-type Pokemon that had the ability Rebirth that said once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If it is heads, you may put Ho-Oh from your discard pile onto your bench, so you use this ability when Ho-Oh is in your discard pile. Then you may attach up to 3 different types of basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So you would want to play multiple different types of energy in your deck, which has been a theme amongst many different Ho-Ohs to put onto Ho-Oh. This being the main utility of Ho-Oh, but it also had an attack Rainbow Burn. For 3 colorless, it did 20 plus 20 for each different type of basic energy attached to this Pokemon. Ho-Oh started off as a successful deck right out of the start of Ho-Oh coming into the Standard format. Puka, Kyle Sukovich, who now works for Pokemon, see him commentating multiple different streams, he won 4 different city championships in a row, which were League Cups from back in the day, with this Ho-Oh deck, using Ultra Ball and Professor Juniper to get Ho-Ohs into the discard pile, and then Energy Switch to move the energies off of Ho-Oh onto different attackers. You could play things like Mewtwo EX with X-Ball, Terrakion to knock out Darkrai's. Sigilyph from Dragons Exalted was a safeguard Pokemon, so it could not be damaged by GXs. And then Landorus EX was just a really efficient attacker that you could put these fighting energies on and either do Lance Judgment for lots of damage or Hammerhead for 30-30, just like Jet Punch does on Buzzwole GX as of recently. Energy Switch being so strong just to move these energies off of Ho-Oh was a theme that we saw continue past this deck. The Rainbow Road deck used Rebirth Ho-Oh in that deck alongside Battle Compressor, Trainer's Mail, and multiple other different basic EX Pokemon that you could find with Hoopa GX to get this really powerful engine going that you could just be swinging for upwards of 200 damage with a single prize Pokemon as long as you had a double colorless and a fairy energy attached to it. Outside of that, since you needed to play different types of energy, you could also play things like Lightning Energy, Water Energy, or Dark Energy for cards like Jolteon EX, Glaceon EX, and Yveltal EX, just as different powerful options you could play alongside of these cards because you can move the energies off of Ho-Oh so well. So due to the diversity of Ho-Oh and the uniqueness of the card and what it's done, Ho-Oh EX comes in at number 9 on our list. Coming in at number 8 on this list is Magcargo. There were 2 different variations of this card. There was one printed in EX Deoxys and one recently printed in Celestial Storm that we will be talking about. The one from Celestial Storm being a copy, essentially, of this original one printed with just minor changes. They both have the Smooth Over ability, which says once during a turn before you attack, you may search your deck for a card and put it on top of your deck, then shuffle your deck afterward. And then the Combustion attack for Fire Double Colorless to do 50. The differences between these 2 cards was that the EX Deoxys one had the attack knockover, which could do 10 and discard a stadium, but then the Magcargo that has been in Standard recently had 90 HP. All that we are here to talk about is the Smooth Over ability. Smooth Over on the Magcargo from Deoxys was used with Ludicolo, which had the Poke Power that you may draw the top card of your deck. So with Magcargo, you could just essentially stack your deck any way that you wanted it to. Then the Magcargo that came out in Standard was used in a variety of decks, such as the Zorag Magcargo deck, which everyone was so scared of at Worlds going into the 2018 Worlds. The deck then came out a little bit more in Cups later after the format changed, but then most notably used in Granbull, which you could use it to smooth over the top card of your deck to always get your hand down to 0 cards every single turn alongside a Rangaroo from Sun and Moon. So Magcargo, just being a great consistency engine that always allowed decks to do what it wants to do, put it here at number 8 on this list for being powerful in both eras that this card was printed. Coming in at number 7 on our list is Emboar from Black and White, but also Legendary Treasures. This card also had a reprint situation come along with it, but it was the exact same card, just with different artwork. So Emboar from Black and White and Legendary Treasures, and I believe also Next Destinies, if I remember correctly. Yes, the Secret Rare was in Next Destinies. Had the ability Inferno Fandango, which is going to sound very familiar to something we talked about in the last video. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a fire energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. So if you remember the Rain Dance ability that was very high up on our last top 10, the top 10 water Pokemon, this is the exact same ability. Then it also, for Fire, Colorless, had Heat Crash for 80. Notably not as relevant on this Stage 2 150 HP Pokemon. We are here for this ability, and the ability made its way into a variety of different decks, again in both times it was printed. The World's winning deck from 2011, the year they had the mid-season rotation, was David Cohen's Magnezone Prime Emboar deck that also featured Reshiram from Black and White, just being able to use these very strong attacks that do lots of damage by getting all these energies into play because of Emboar. Then whenever Emboar came back in Legendary Treasures, it saw contention in Raybor Fox, which was Rayquaza EX from Dragons Exalted, alongside Delphox from X and Y, which was a Stage 2 Pokemon that had an ability that just let you drop until you had 6 cards in your hand, which is funny enough the exact same ability that Magnezone Prime had. Alongside of that, it had an attack for 3 fire that was Secret Sword, so for 3 fire you did 50 plus 20 damage for each fire energy attached to this Pokemon instead of water. But that allowed this deck to just continue getting all these energies, allow you to set up multiple Stage 2s in a game because you had the consistency, and attack with this Rayquaza EX. Kyle Sablehouse, who also commentates for Pokemon now, this is just the day of all the people that commentated for Pokemon, won the 2014 North Carolina State Championships with this, and then also got second at Georgia Regionals, losing to Danny Altavia playing Blastoise Black Kyurem in the finals. Both of those decks were very similar, but just being weak to water in certain occasions just definitely made that matchup a little bit more poor. But Emboar coming out and just being successful in both of those archetypes allowed Emboar to be put here on number 7 on the list. Coming in at number 6, and I personally feel like this should be higher on this list, but the other people voted against me, so let me know in the comments whenever you hear me talk about this card, is Volcanion EX. This card dominated so much of Standard while it was legal. The deck top-8'd the first 5 internationals back-to-back. The first international that it didn't top 8 was the second international of the 2018 season, a whole year after they introduced internationals, and the deck was successful throughout all of that time. Let's go ahead and talk about the card, though. Volcanion EX is a 100 HP fire and water type Pokemon. We chose to put it on this list because it attacks for a fire type cost. A few people were asking, well, Volcanion EX is a very powerful water type Pokemon. Why is it not on the water type list? It basically is a fire type Pokemon. The only real reason it was a water type Pokemon was that eventually Brooklet Hill would be able to find it, which is kind of funny that interaction actually did end up coming up while this card was legal. But 100 HP fire and water type Pokemon with the ability Steam Up that says once during your turn before you attack, you may discard a fire energy from your hand. If you do, your basic fire Pokemon's attacks will do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. From there, for fire colorless, you could do Volcanic Heat for 130, and this Pokemon could not attack during your next turn. So Volcanion, alongside of the baby Volcanion, which with Power Heater, was just an insane deck, allowing you to hit for large amounts of damage with your basic Pokemon just as fast as possible. Using Power Heater just allowed you to set up multiple Volcanions at once while doing extra damage with Steam Up. You could be doing 80 to 110, even more with cards like Fury Belt and Muscle Band that were legal during the time that this card was printed. And eventually, the deck moved outside of Standard to Expanded, so with a Volcanion Turtonator, Sam Chen getting second at Fort Wayne with the deck that he worked on the list with Ryan Sablehouse, getting 11th of that tournament. This deck, being able to use Blacksmith and Expanded, allowed you just to use Turtonator GX every single turn using Bright Flame. Continuing from that, Volcanion did see play in the Ho-Oh decks that I mentioned a little bit in the intro. Eric argued that the deck should probably not be higher on this list, or at least the card Volcanion, because the deck never really had like a cap performance. It was always kind of just like a deck that existed. The only tournament that it won was it won Hartford Regionals in 2017, Igor Costa beating Zhao Zhao in the finals for that tournament. So impressive finish there from Volcanion, but outside of that, it struggled with really large finishes outside of that, so I kind of understand where they can see that argument, but Volcanion definitely just was such a relevant force throughout the entire time it was in Standard. The deck even got 10th and 11th at the 2016 World Championships. People were doubting Volcanion a lot when it came out at that point in time. It was obviously very good, but people were questioning whether or not it could keep up with things like Night March or Water Box that had also came out from Nationals of that year. And so people weren't just really sure if the deck could really fit into the metagame, but I'm going to butcher these names. Kojiro Suyurata and Kazuki Kazuhara were two players from Japan that got 10th and 11th with Volcanion, but Volcanion EX goes on number 6 on this list. Coming in at number 5 on this list is Flareon EX, notably the lowercase EX, not the capital EX that Flareon saw later on in its life. We're going all the way back to Delta Species for this card. This is a 110 HP Stage 1 Pokemon, evolves from Eevee. It has the ability Evolutionary Flame, which says once during your turn when you play Flareon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may choose one of the defending Pokemon. This is worded because double battles was something that existed within the game at this point, but basically was never relevant. So essentially, you choose your opponent's active. Then it is now burned and confused. So you inflicted it with 2 status conditions. The attacks that it had for Fire Colorless, you could use Flame Screen for 30, and then during your opponent's next turn, any damage done to this Pokemon is reduced by 20. And then for Fire and 2 Colorless, you could use Heat Tackle to do 70, and Flareon EX does 10 damage to itself. This card was most notably used alongside Ariados from Unseen Forces in the Flareados deck from the 2006 format. Ariados was a Grass-type Stage 1 Pokemon. It had 70 HP, and the main attack that mattered here is Reactive Poison that for 1 colorless did 10 plus 30 for each special condition on their active. So whenever you evolved into Flareon, for 1 energy, you could do 70 damage. Now I know that that is completely laughable now, but in this format, EXs had maybe 100 to 120 HP at max. So between that and the burn and possible confusion flip, you were doing very strong damage with this Pokemon. Spider Trap was also a surprisingly good attack. For 1 grass, the defending Pokemon is now asleep and poisoned, but before using this attack, you may switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their defending Pokemon, and notably, that is worded the way that you get to choose that Pokemon that comes up. If you do, the new Pokemon is asleep and poisoned. When it says your opponent chooses the defending Pokemon to switch, that was because of this double battle wording that was mentioned. But Ariados, alongside of Flareon, this deck was built so you could choose which of your opponent's Pokemon to bring up, make it harder for them to get the ball rolling, and then do large amounts of damage because of the ability from Flareon. The deck did play fire energies as well as multi-energies, so you definitely were capable of attacking with Flareon in that deck, but Flareon mainly was a support role in this very dominant deck from this format, bringing it to number 5 on this list. Coming in at number 4 on this list, and you can dare to disagree with us because this card came out so recently, but this card definitely deserves to be on here, is Blacephalon GX. Blacephalon GX is a basic Ultra Beast 180 HP Fire-type Pokemon with 3 very solid attacks. The first attack for 1 fire is Bursting Burn. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned and confused. If you think that this attack is bad, you have not used it enough. Anytime that I've seen this deck be used by players at a very successful level, they are using Bursting Burn almost as often getting started set up as they are using Mind Blown. The games that you're using Mind Blown all the time are the games that your draws are going super well, but Bursting Burn ends up being a very good attack as well. Speaking of Mind Blown, for Fire, you may use Mind Blown for 50 times the amount of fire energy that you put into your Lost Zone that are attached to your Pokemon. So if you discard 3 energy from your Pokemon in play and you put them into the Lost Zone, you do 150 damage, and this for 2 energy scales to be able to take huge knockouts. That's why you were able to see Shintaro Ito take this deck all the way to 2nd place at Worlds this most recent year in 2019. Just being able to knock out these huge HP tag teams with energies that you put into play from Naganadel, from Forbidden Light, just allowed this card to easily succeed and find its spot in the metagame. And then lastly, there's Burst GX for 1 fire. You discard one of your prize cards. If it's an energy, you attach it to one of your Pokemon. So what's awesome about this is that if you go second, you just always have this attack that lets you take a prize card, and if you're lucky, accelerate an energy. But your deck plays so much energy that you're hitting that pretty frequently. So not only are you, quote, taking a prize card, you're also getting a bonus attachment. This card has mostly seen play alongside of Naganadel with the ability charging up. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So you just discard as many energies as you can off of Mysterious Treasure and Ultra Ball and put them into play with Naganadel. But more recently, it's seen a little bit of play with Green's Exploration at World, just showing up in surprisingly large numbers for a deck that did not come out really that much before that. So really interesting finish for Blacephalon, but I just want to go over some of these results. The deck got 1st place at Madison, Wisconsin in the hands of Ian Robb. Then the deck got 1st place in Collinsville in the hands of Zach Lesage of Rare Candy. Then it also got 1st place at Mexico City by Zach Lesage. And then at 7th for Zach Lesage, he never really dropped the deck ever at the Sao Paulo International. But the most impressive finish to me, and what I think makes this deck absolutely go on this list, is Roanoke, Virginia Regionals 2018. The deck got 2nd, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and made up 5 of the top 16. But if you look at the 16 decks that made Day 2, Blacephalon was 19 of the 68 decks. I'm sorry, I said 16 when I was talking about top 16. But 68 decks made Day 2, and 19 of them were Blacephalon. That is a crazy percentage turnover rate. The deck that had the next highest percentage in Day 2 were Zoroark Decidueye Ninetales and Gardevoir Swampert Ninetales, both featuring 6 copies of the deck. So you go from 19 copies of Blacephalon Naganadel to 6 copies of these other 2 decks in the tournament. So the deck made up 28% of Day 2 and then still put 5 into the top 16. So Blacephalon, though it came out recently between the power of Naganadel and Beast Ring, which I barely talked about, just being able to put so many energy onto this Pokemon, even after the mid-game, just being able to throw stuff on here, and then Welder as of recently in the Greens variants, putting energy into play, allow Blacephalon to make 4th on this list. Coming in at number 3 on this list, our oldest card on the list is Blaziken from Ruby Sapphire. Blaziken is a Stage 2 100 HP Pokemon with the Pokepower Fire Starter. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon, and you can't use this power if Blaziken is affected by a special condition. And then for Fire Double Colorless, you could do Fire Stream for 50, and you discard a fire attached to Blaziken, and if you do, you do 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So 50 and spread 10. This card also got a recent reprint in Dragon Majesty, but has had nowhere the amount of playability now as this original iteration of Blaziken. Blaziken had a successful performance at the 2004 Worlds, and I hate that I don't have as much knowledge on tournament information for this deck, but Blaziken had multiple different archetypes being combined with Ampharos from Expeditions, being just its own attacker in a deck with Delcatty from Ruby Sapphire, allowing you to draw more cards, and also in addition to playing it with Delcatty, you could play it with Delcatty and with Salamence. So Blaziken just being able to have a Malamar type effect, or an electric type effect, or whatever of the many Pokemon that have had this accelerated energy from your discard pile into play effect that you'd like to refer to, that generally ends up being strong in some sort of variant that can exist while cards like this are legal. There was also a Blaziken EX that had a very powerful snipe damage attack. Blaziken EX, stage 2 and 140 hit points. 150, my bad. It was a EX, which meant that you take 2 prizes on it, but for a fire and a colorless, you do Blaze Kick for 30, and you flip a coin. If heads, you do 20 more. If tails, are burned in addition to the 30 damage. And then, here we go, for 2 fire and 2 colorless, you discard 2 fire from this Pokemon, and then you snipe 100 on your opponent's board. So 4 energy, do 100 damage is just absolutely crazy in this format, where if you look at it, this stage 2 Blaziken has 100 HP. So being able to play both of those Blazikens together in this format that allows you to set up multiples of the different stage 2s being powered up by this Blaziken, making it all work. So Blaziken, sadly, I hate that I do not have more information about this card in like its grander scheme and history, but Blaziken just did a very successful job putting energies into play, getting decks set up and ready to go, especially alongside Delcatty that would let you discard a energy to draw 3 cards. So that just made that deck turbo out consistency and just do very well in the 2004 year. So there you go for Blaziken at number 3. Coming in at number 2 on this list is a card that was mentioned earlier, but I don't know if I talked about it enough for you to really think about it up here. It is Reshiram from Black and White, though this card was also printed many different times throughout the Black and White era. Basic with 130 HP, which is the first time that a basic Pokemon had been printed with 130 HP, even passing things like Baset Chansey and stuff like that. So in Black and White, this was ridiculous to have a basic with 130 HP. For a double colorless, you could do 20 plus 10 for each damage counter on this Pokemon, which can be used in conjunction with things like Typhlosion Prime that accelerate energy and also put damage on your Pokemon to make these attacks stronger. And then for Fire colorless, there is Blue Flare for 120. You discard 2 energy attached to this Pokemon, but when paired with cards like Emboar that accelerate energy from the hand, or Typhlosion that accelerate energy from the discard pile, this just completely becomes a non-issue. Reshiram saw play in both of those decks, having very successful finishes as a main attacker. There were cards like Rescue Energy, not Recycle Energy, that would let you loop your Reshirams back to your hand so you could continue using them, and you could force your opponents to get through 6 different Reshirams. Reshiram also paired up with stuff later on, like the Emboar deck in the future that we mentioned, to get past Safeguard, but also just be a strong, efficient attacker. But Reshiram, just being able to do so much damage so consistently, dominated this format, alongside Zekrom, which I'm sure that we'll talk about when we get to the electric type list. But Reshiram coming in at number 2 on this list just because it was so outrageously strong in this format, being a basic that could do 120, knocked out everything else that was pretty relevant in the format with the exception of some stage 2s, but even then, plus power and Kingdra Prime can get you the rest of the way. So Reshiram, very strong card, and could easily one-shot stuff throughout the entirety of its time, either from the Heart Gold Soul Silver to the Black and White format, and then dropping off whenever so many EXs started to see play, but coming back whenever we had some decent fire support again. So Reshiram ends up being number 2 on the list. Coming in on number 1 on the list, this is not a technical repeat because it is a tag team Pokemon, is Reshiram and Charizard GX. This card is insanely strong, and if you go to a tournament right now, there is no way you do not see this card. It might be a little bit high up in the grand scheme of the future just because of its current modern day relevance, and there is an argument that maybe Welder is the number 1 fire type Pokemon on this list, even though it's a supporter that greatly assists these decks. But let's dive into this extremely powerful busted card with 3 different attacks. So Reshiram and Charizard GX tag team is a tag team that gives up 3 prizes when it is knocked out. However, it is compensated by that with 270 HP and 3 attacks. For a fire and a colorless, you do Outrage for 30 plus 10 for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So if you paid any attention to the last Reshiram that had a very strong attack like this, it definitely works out well. Here, if you take a hit and you don't draw into a welder or something, you can still do massive amounts of damage, but it also just makes it really hard to hit this Pokemon and not take a knockout, because for 2 energy, they can just hit you and knock you out back. However, if Outrage isn't good enough as an attack, Flare Strike will. For Fire, colorless, you do Flare Strike for 230. This Pokemon cannot use Flare Strike during your next turn. So you have a basic Pokemon that can do 230 damage, and it says that you can't use Flare Strike during your next turn, but that doesn't mean that you can't use Outrage or Double Blaze GX. For Fire plus, it does 200 plus if this Pokemon has at least 3 extra fire energy attached to it, so 6 fire total. This attack does 100 more damage and goes through all effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So it becomes 300 damage flat, nothing else that matters. Reshiram Charizard is a crazy absurd strong card featuring 2 main different varieties of decks, being the Greens variant powered up by Volcanion, or the Ability Zard variant that is using cards like Ninetales and Dedenne just to keep getting this crazy powerful attacker out just over and over again. The fact that it has 270 HP just means that it's not going to die, and when you pair it with really strong non-GX attackers that force these super awkward prize trades, you can really play an 8 prize game with these tag teams, forcing them to knock out 1 and then 2 single prize Pokemon and then another tag team. Welder just lets you power this up super fast, and I wouldn't be surprised if whenever we get to expanded with this card in the future, that between Welder and Blacksmith and Max Elixir, that Reshiram Charizard makes a big dent into that format as well, because on a basic, this is just doing so much damage so fast, and you can even combine this with some other cards that we've talked about, a little bit like Volcanion EX, to make this do even more damage to knock out other tag teams, or things like Turtonator just to power this up if Welder and Blacksmith is not enough for you. Reshiram Charizard, just a crazy absurdly powerful Pokemon that there's nothing about the card that is bad. I mean, even the fact that it gives up 3 prizes is just so neglected because of how powerful the card is. It's obvious that maybe this card might not be as good without Welder in Standard, but due to Welder coming out in the same set as this, it's almost like the Keldeo Blastoise thing coming out at the same time as each other. These cards were obviously meant to be paired together and have just been ridiculously strong and will continue to be strong throughout the entire rest of the Standard. I don't see any situation that any water type or anything can come out that just radically destroys this deck and makes this deck bad. If you think about Worlds, there were decks playing Martial Arts Dojo and Fighting Energy in their Reshiram Charizard list, such like the one that Sam Chen played on stream, but other people did it in the open, so that they could knock out other Reshiram Charizards in one shot. So then you're making that go from 230 to 270 if you're behind on prizes. If you're not behind on prizes, you do 240, you knock out a Pikachu Zekrom. So the math for this card is just crazy absurd. Having a GX attack that can do 300 knocks out any tag team, and it's not hard to power up if you go attach Welder, or if you use a Volcanion to power it up. Just every piece of this card is ridiculously absurd. But I'm going to stop gawking over it. With that, that is the top 10 here on this channel. If you disagreed with any cards in the top 10, the order of the top 10, if you think that Volcanion EX needs to be higher on the list like I do, let us know in the comments. Also, let us know what types you want to see next, or if you would like something different to kind of mix it up, like a top 10 items, top 10 supporters, stuff like that. Outside of that, check out all of our social media. We got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. Make sure to like and subscribe this video. Really important for stuff on YouTube. And then also, if you want to support us individually, you can go to our Patreon, where we offer exclusive articles, deck advice. We post our lists before the tournament and stuff like that. Got some great stuff going on there as well. But my name is Xander Bennett. Thank you for listening to this top 10 featuring our 2 honorable mentions. And let us know what you want to see next. Rare Candy, Xander Bennett signing out.